Um, Hi, Sydney. It's really good to
Hi,
meet you.
Jen.
Yeah,
You
virtually.
too. I
Yeah,
know. There's so many opportunities that have arisen from all this virtual connection we've been doing.
yeah, no, definitely. Well, I hope you're doing okay there,
Thank
managing.
you. You
Yeah,
too.
happy to be in conversation with you. Let me know whenever you're ready.
Yeah, I am totally ready. Hi, everyone watching, Montserrat students or artists or just people interested. I am a gallery assistant to the Montserrat Galleries. My name is Sydney Rose Gauthier. I use she, her pronouns, and I am an illustrator at Montserrat College of Art. And I have the great pleasure of being able to interview a wonderful visiting artist, Ngoc-Tran Vu, who you can introduce yourself.
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. I'm really happy to be here. My full name is Ngoc-Tran Vu, but I go by Tran. My pronoun is she, her. I'm currently based in Boston, specifically Dorchester, where I grew up. And yeah, really excited to be in conversation with Sydney here.
Wonderful. I have some little questions
Mhm.
that I mean we can stray from them too. These are some things I was personally curious about after seeing your artwork for the first time and like publishing little invitations to the show and making people aware of it. But let me see, where should we start? So yeah, for people who haven't seen your work, I read a little bit about the installation you have at the Montserrat Galleries made elsewhere. I described to you, I haven't been able to see it in person yet, but I have seen pictures, so I know a bit about it. But I was reading about your kind of intro to the piece and what it means to you, but I was just wondering for people who maybe haven't seen it yet or things you weren't able to write down in that paragraph, maybe if you could tell me a little bit more about what the piece is to you.
Yeah, definitely. The piece is it really addresses issues and themes of migration and displacement,
Mm,
and specifically the sculpture made of kind of mixed media and repurposed recycled materials made from outside the US, and it's really modeled after the original design of Lady Liberty. um,
mhm.
yeah, for people who don't know, the original design, the sculpture who's known for the Statue of Liberty, Frederick Bertolli, his original design was actually of an Egyptian woman. This was like way back when. I forget the exact century. I don't want to mix it up, but
Yeah.
I had saw an article from public media, kind of PRI, I believe, that talked about kind of the original design and what it was intentioned for. It was
Mm,
of an Egyptian lady for the woman for the opening of the Egyptian Canal. And when that project didn't happen, I think because of fundings and everything like that, the artist decided to not use that same design. And then years later, with the New York City, he decided to basically recycle his kind of design, but this time around make it an Anglo woman, kind of the same
mm.
original design, but then basically made her for kind of the Americas. And so when I saw this article, I was like, oh, this is so interesting. And this was around the time in 2018, with just a
Right.
lot of ongoing immigration things, and especially with Trump being in presidency, and kind of around
Yeah.
like the Muslim ban. And so I was like, wow, it's so like kind of so much irony that the symbolism of America, of freedom, of Lady Liberty is actually modeled after a woman of color, kind of in base
Yeah.
in Egypt, that not many people know about. And with all the policies that's happening and people who are affected, immigrant family, refugee families, worldwide. Not It's not just an American issue, but
Right.
so much is happening. But yet the symbolism of America. So I thought, to really engage kind of timely issue, and I've been thinking a lot around, environmental issue, climate change.
Yeah.
How do I continue to even in my own practice as an artist, really use repurposed material, and thinking
Mhm.
about where our materials are made, and where's the kind of the labor behind it. So I wanted to really create and really bring kind of notices to the original design of Lady Liberty, and to kind of pay homage to like its origins, but in taking into consideration kind of current issues that are happening. So hence the kind of the outfits is made of the flags of quote unquote Muslim banned countries, because I wanted to highlight that. And I wanted to kind of showcase kind of, so her skin is made out of kind of bamboo leaves. I wanted to use materials that are specifically made from outside the US to highlight kind of the labor and kind of economic around that. So that's really, I think, the background behind that. And I wanted to kind of bring that to light. And then with this latest installation, there's a backdrop of conical hats too. So some of you may know that these are hats in Asia, specifically Southeast Asia, where a lot of farmers, even people in the city, wear them, for really like to be out in the field, to kind of block the sunlight. And I really wanted to kind of use that image. And there's also another kind of political story behind that too. Last year, they found 39 bodies of migrant folks in a refrigerated truck in the UK, and so I wanted to kind of bring highlight to that kind of tragedy that happened. Is definitely not the first, and won't be the last, but specifically the migrant bodies ended up being Vietnamese bodies, and I wanted to kind of bring highlight to that kind of issue, and thinking about kind of the representation of the conical hats, where a lot of the people that died were from the northern Vietnam, where a lot of them are in agriculture, and kind of the journey that they go through in order to quote unquote kind of migrate to the UK area. So that was kind of against that backdrop. I wanted to kind of pay an homage to their lives, but then also thinking around this whole greater issue of migration and displacement.
Wow.
Yeah.
I thank you for like going through the histories of each piece. Like, as tragic as they are, like, they need to be talked about. And I didn't know that looking at the piece. I didn't know that history. It's not something I've educated myself on yet. So I appreciate that knowledge, and then seeing the creative liberties you took in creating the piece. I love the bit about environmentalism. Like we talked about, my work has a lot of environmentalism in it, and you really kind of thought through, picking each material out, and there's a lot of history, and there's a lot of storytelling that is something I haven't really been exposed to, because I don't work 3D, but I completely admire. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
It must have. How long did the piece take you?
So the sculpture itself, it was developed. I was in residency at the Boston Center for the Arts, BCA, beginning of 2018. So in about about 2 months, I was just kind of like reworking it, doing a little bit of history, thinking about kind of the flag and its representation.
Right.
And then the conical hats was actually developed this past year when I was actually in residence at Mass MoCA. And so thinking about, kind of like the, the lives and also the history. So, I mean, what's tricky is that, like, there is a lot of history there. And I was trying to figure out if it's, is it like almost too much messaging? What is it? It's always like, like that simplicity of like less is more. Does it make sense? And then really making sure that it really pays kind of respect to to the lives, to people that have been affected by these very issue. So that's always for me like kind of an ongoing, and like how much do I embed that into the work? Can the work stand for itself, or do the viewer need to read a lot more in the background to really understand what the piece is about?
I certainly think that the work can stand for itself, but for people that are interested in and want to learn more, like knowing that information, like in the amount of work you put into it, just adds whole nother layer, millions more layers to the piece. So I think you can never add too much, personally. But yeah, actually going off that question, and kind of bringing like myself into it, like as a young artist who hasn't shown much of my work or displayed it yet in maybe a public space, I personally feel very intimidated by galleries and professional artists sometimes. I forget that we're all learning, and artists like yourself were once in my shoes. I forget that established artists like must also struggle to create and have issues when they let interfere with their creative vision. And when you were making Made Elsewhere, did you have any particular struggles? And if you did, like, how did you move past them?
I mean, I definitely, it always feel like a work in progress for me. I mean, and I think that's part of it, part of the struggle, part of like the brainstorming, figuring out, does this make sense? Does this go here?
Right.
And I feel like that's part of that creative process. And kind of in that journey of like, where kind of I start to where I kind of end up. Sometimes I don't even know myself, and I feel like that's part of the magic too. That's part
Yeah.
of like, we have like ideas, a vision, but then part of it is that journey of like, figuring out this, does it work? And if it doesn't, it's okay to like diverge and to really experiment. I think as artists, as creative workers, that process of experimentation is embedded in that creative process. For me, I'm also really rooted in, like mentioned, storytelling, really like making sure I, kind of work in kind of like a journalism background, making sure that, the evidence, almost like fact checking myself constantly, being
Yeah.
really true to the material, being true to kind of what I envision. So that's all kind of, and it's never like, kind of the work is never done. It's always like, like depending on the scale that you want to make it, it can always be expanded upon. I mean, when I finished the residency at the BCA in 2018, I was like, okay, this work seems done. But then with this, the latest residency, I was like, oh, I feel like I can add more to it. And it's almost like, kind of that constant kind of work in progress. And so, I mean, I think, I think, they say sometimes art is kind of in the eyes of the beholder, or like, can the art have its own agency, or does it,
Course,
does the artist even need to kind of be there, kind of. So, I mean, all of that is in constant, I think, motion, and it's never like one answer or a clear answer for each piece and kind of practice. And so, I don't know that I think addresses your question specifically, but all to say is I think that's in constantly where I think I'm constantly also in learning too, and also researching and finding ways to make the work stronger, and in being more coherent about what I'm trying to say.
I think that definitely answered my question. I feel like sometimes I forget that you can keep adding on to work even after you feel like it's done, instead of kind of like redoing it, like, no, you can work on top of it. And that must be really exciting with sculpture and more 3D works too, because you can like physically see the history. And then you mentioned like a reference and how you keep learning. It's obviously so important to like keep learning and fact checking yourself. It's also very admirable and a big part of your process. For people who want to learn more about the history behind your work and kind of the history of your pieces, and where you take inspiration from, do you have any recommendations on places to start? Maybe like favorite books or authors, or what's your go-to database for research? Is it talking through the community? Is it going to the library?
I think all of the above. Like I'm very people centric. So I'm always in conversation with, different types of people intergenerationally, in, in different languages too. And then, I'm big onto, kind of news information. I mean, now we live in such, a digital age of just constant content, and like noises and stuff. But at the same time, I'm someone that I kind of want to know what's going on. I try to, so of course sometimes put filters on it and things like that, but sometimes like I think it's good just to know, even when I'm like, okay, then I try to like shut things off when I can. But just to even know what's happening in different parts of the world, and not just in, in the US, and really understanding, stories and events from different perspectives throughout history. I think my go-to sources, I try to read as much as I can, from, daily kind of bigger newspaper to even blogs, to even, to be honest, even gossip magazine. I think to even understand pop culture, to understand, and to even, and now with, social media, like what the people that I find most interesting are people that are able to, I think, to be nimble. I think to use humor. I think to use who are not afraid to question themselves, and who are really, I think, constantly kind of learning, like kind of as you mentioned. I think when people or things are so stagnant, it doesn't, you can kind of, it doesn't, I think you have to be kind of timely and up with the time. You have to be able to understand, you know, when, where, why, how. I
Yeah.
think all of that is so important for growth and learning. And so I think I try to find almost inspiration in so many different places. I mean, nature's including one of them, even, you know, going right down the street and wherever I am, and you know, understanding kind of the place, the history, being able to ground myself is always really, I think, important. And so, yeah, sometimes I find the inspiration and different sparks in like almost the randomest places, because I think it's
Yeah.
possible to seek that anywhere and everywhere.
Yeah, you certainly can find inspiration and learn from anywhere.
Yeah.
You keep surprising me with like some of your answers, like gossip magazines. It's such a, it is a, I mean, I don't know if reliable is the word I'd use, but it is a source, and
Yeah,
it's a good
exactly. It's a
source.
story. It doesn't always have to, you know, it's not always like a trustworthy source, but it's still,
Yeah,
it's framing. It's like who's putting it out there, who's consuming this information. I think all of
exactly.
that is super interesting.
That's such a good point, though. Like, I didn't even, I wouldn't know that. Like, I'd love to see some more of your work. I did check out your website, but like, from knowing this one piece, I just had assumed like you were very, you know, database expert, and you write a lot of essays, which I'm sure you do, but also knowing that, you know, I forget sometimes that like you're a person too. Like, you see all this stuff. We're all living in the digital age together. Like, we're all seeing this social media and this gossip stuff. So that's, I just think it's really interesting you brought that up. um, Something else I was reading on your website was that community plays a large role in your work, which I admire so much, and I'd like to get more into myself. But in your artist statement, I read about how that influences you, and I'm wondering how COVID has affected that community that you base a lot of your work around, and how social outreach has become maybe a portion of your work and research. Like, you kind of mentioned that a little bit, but just overall, how has it affected you? Has it been negative, positive, a little bit of both?
Um, if I mean, it feels like a roller coaster. It feels like, you know, I think when, you know, COVID, I think has affected almost everyone. It's affected our world.
Mm-hmm.
For me, it definitely feels like a roller coaster. At the, you know, beginning, it was just like, oh, I'm someone that is always like, you know, out and about in my community, doing kind of different, very engagement around. And so, to be honest, at the beginning, to be able to kind of have a break from that was kind of a relief. I was like, I can just, you
Yeah.
know, stay at home, like be able, not feel like I have to constantly be on the go. I think there are definitely
Mm-hmm.
moments where I'm like, I'm just, yeah, I'm not able to even catch my own breath. So I think to have almost that pause was definitely really, really valuable. But for
Mm-hmm.
me, also recognizing so many people are, you know, risking their lives, frontline, you know,
Right.
responders, people who don't have the privilege to be able to, you know, to stay put and be inside. So I
Right.
definitely recognizing for myself in my own privilege around that. And then, you know, for me in terms of like my work, I was like, oh, this can be a chance for me to catch up on things that I wanted to, even around the house or something like that. And
Mm-hmm.
then, you know, of course, the adjustment, things that are in person, making it kind of virtual for me, leading workshop, teaching as well,
Oh yeah.
having kind of that, you know, adaptability and being able to, you know, to be, you know, okay with, you know, tech and digital skill. That's also, you know, a privilege too.
Right, of
So I was
course.
able to, you know, to adapt and not, you know, have too many issues or anything around that. And then, you know, I've been kind of actually, you know, working and addressing kind of this issue of creative resiliency too, and for like a lot of people look towards artists or creative workers, especially
Right.
time to be like, okay, what happens now? And I always tell like a lot of, you know, or I'm in conversation with artists and other creative people that's like, it's almost this, you know, this, there is a lot of pressure. There's, you know, he's like,
Yeah, yeah.
hey, if you're not spending this time writing a whole Shakespeare play or publishing or doing something or creating work, like what are you doing? And
Right.
so and I've since learned the term toxic positivity. That's also like a term that's come out where it's just like, well, if you're not making use of your time, what are you really doing? And so again, that the pressure that we create for ourselves, and then also, you know, in thinking that we have to make use of like all of our time when it's just like, I think to exist, that's a form of kind of, survival, and to be able to
Yeah.
get peace with, with ourselves and our, taking care of our health, our families, people around us, that in itself is a form of creative resiliency. And so, I think to your question about like how has this kind of time it's it's been a roller coaster. There are moments when, or the times when I feel like sometimes my week is different, time to time, figuring
Yeah.
out how to be sustainable. It's given me, time to check in with people too. Definitely, like you mentioned, different kind of opportunity, different form of accessibility has come about. But on the
Yep.
other hand, people who aren't able to, to access spaces. And right now I'm working on a project, the Viet Family Project, kind of
Hmm.
virtual event, thinking around accessibility, working with, an older kind of community members, and thinking around all of that. So for me, I'm always, I try to definitely think about, equity in a lot of my work, and thinking about inclusion, kind of like
Hmm.
accessibility. Who is my primary audience? Who is this for? How can I, bring it, and kind of into the bigger picture in terms of like what is kind of my goals, and kind of vision for the message that I want to get across, and who do I want to, invite to
Yeah.
the table. Um,
Certainly.
yeah.
Yeah. Accessibility is such a big factor on how people are, responding to COVID, because like you said, the access to internet and technology is such a privilege, especially right now with everything going on, and a lot of people are stuck, and you can't easily go to the library anymore and look up things. And I can see how that has impacted a lot of people, and see how it's impacted me personally, and to keep that in mind while you're making work is very important. And it's something I actually haven't done. I haven't thought about like, oh, the accessibility of people seeing my work. So I appreciate that. And then like you have yours like in the gallery. It's in the Made Elsewhere sculpture. Is it in the front window of the 301 gallery?
Yeah, it's at the front. It's on the left side if you're looking at like the 301. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember. I thought from the pictures that I had gotten sent, because I haven't been able to go yet, but that in itself is an accessible option, because people who maybe are just driving by, or they
Mhm.
can't walk out on the street, or they can't go into a gallery because of health reasons. That in itself is accessible. Was that something that you had thought of when installing it, or was that just by chance something that happened to fall into place?
I mean, to be honest, it was kind of by chance. I think it was the
Yeah.
opportunity to kind of install kind of in a window space.
Hmm.
And then when I, came to visit beforehand, I think I was just like, oh, wow, this is just like right in kind of pretty much kind of like Main Street a bit. And like,
Yeah.
I think, and right across from, I think, a really interesting laundromat too. I think
Yep.
the whole space. And I think to kind of have like that accessibility of like a window space, and but yet it's like kind of
Right.
an art school, art building. I thought all of that is super interesting. Yeah, and I like that it's like, we often associate kind of like window with like businesses or something, but I
Uh-huh.
like, see, I was like, oh, like this is actually like and I saw like the artists who installed before me and everything too. So I was like, oh, what a great kind of way to engage kind of the public.
Mhm.
And I think in a way, like, what is considered kind of public art? Is it like, is it
Mhm.
accessible? And so I think a lot of those and is it, socially kind of in form of engagement and all of that. And so I'm really drawn to art that is really publicly accessible, because
Yeah.
as opposed to kind of when you mentioned like really like gallery or kind of museum, that brings
Mm.
on a whole level of like, bureaucracy, hierarchy, almost intimidation. But I think when art that is readily accessible to the
Mhm.
public, I think the exchange and interaction, I think, is super super interesting, and really valuable.
I totally agree. I think that's when I imagined like accessible public artwork, all I could think of was murals. But you're totally right. Like windows are usually used for like business stuff, but maybe the world can take note of this, and we can start displaying in more areas. Actually, I remember when I was looking at your website, you did work on a mural, right?
Yes.
Was it with a group of artists too? Because I
So yeah, yes and no. So it was very much a community collaboration.
right.
So I recruited, a group of youth artists. Some had, experience with art, some didn't. I
Right.
recruited my neighbors. We created like an advisory board,
Mhm.
so that people could have input kind of on the mural, and if they wanted to participate, they're welcome to. So it was really, the heart of it was a really community organizing initiative that I wanted to be something that was of and by the community, and really
Yeah.
for to kind of reflect kind of the cultural narrative, and really for people to be proud of and to constantly come back to. So that was really like the intentional of it. And so I always say it is a community collaborative. I couldn't have done it by myself, and it took
Oh,
like
yeah.
almost 6 months of planning, really like a month of like really like art kind of making and everything, and then we had an opening, a block party opening, really, where we unveiled it to to the community. And so it
Mhm.
was really truly a collaborative mural.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
I remember seeing the picture taken. I can't recall if it was in front of the mural or not, but I just remember seeing it like with the conversation about the piece itself, and it's just so exciting to get to include yourself and learn about the people that are around you, and make something for that, because that's really all community is everyone coming together and putting their input in and learning a bit about each other.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
kind of goes back to the whole idea of identity that you talked about a bit in your artist statement that I was reading from. When you talk about like self-identity and learning about your history, but also identity of community
Mm.
is really important, because the people around you are kind of what shape you as well. And to lead into my next question, actually, after I was reading the artist statement, when you said you were working with themes of identity and they play a large role in your work, as a member of the queer community myself, I also struggle with this concept every day. I think that quarantine has kind of forced me to think about it even more, and how it plays a role in my artwork. So from just one artist to another, even just a person to another, I was wondering if you had on any advice in figuring out like your identity, like, and how art has helped you do that, or how it's kind of an outlet for that, if any at all.
Yeah, these are really, really great questions, Sydney. I really appreciate it. I mean, I
Oh, of
think
course.
um, kind of with identity, I think it's a work in progress. I mean, I think, it's like, what's that phrase they say about life? It's not about finding it, it's about creating it. And it's
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
I think there are some, parts of our identity that are like, that remains with us, like,
Right.
throughout kind of our lives. And then I think there's some identity that also created and formed too.
Mhm.
Um, for myself, as like, identify as Vietnamese-American. I was, born in Vietnam. I came to the US with my family as
Mhm.
political refugee, and there's kind of a whole kind of journey and story behind that. But
Yeah.
that's definitely, a cultural kind of ethnic identity that, that I hold for myself, and what, the world sees of me, and how I'm treated as well. Um,
Right.
and then for me, as as an artist, I feel pretty lucky that I knew, I knew that I was an artist at a pretty young age, even though I didn't always exactly follow that path. But I
Right.
knew
Right.
that, art making was something that, it just felt so real to me, and that I didn't think about anything else when I'm making it. It's almost like I'm in my own zone. Um,
Yep.
yeah, so yeah, you can definitely relate to that feeling. And so that, and then, throughout my life, I definitely had my struggle with it. And then I felt like
Of
when I was
course.
making art, I always came back to making art, and it's almost like, as much as when I avoid it, it always,
Yeah.
kind of catches up to me. And so there's something really, special and magical about that. Um,
Mhm.
I think too, what you had asked about, just like, around identity. I mean, I mean, I think, like, kind of what I mentioned before, even about kind of that work in kind of progress, is like,
Yeah.
you know, kind of through, for me, through the arts, in the different ways that kind of offer that the art, one can utilize the art as a form of, engagement, reflection,
Yeah.
I think inspiration, healing, and that, we're kind of working ourselves through kind of our own kind of art, and kind of what, what we want to say, what it becomes of us. And I think, in different areas and different periods of our lives when sometimes we're, you know, kind of tested too. We go to different ways where we refine kind of our values and what matters to us and what doesn't matter to us. But I think it's almost like we're part of that kind of work in progress for ourselves when it comes to our kind of our identity. And it, I mean, you know, to also acknowledge the reality of like, you know, oppression and kind of it really sucks sometimes, I think, and, you know, societal and like what is considered, you know, norm or the in and what's considered not a part of that. And like, you know, and that it really translate really, you know, in regards to even like policy that's play out in the communities that we're a part of, the privileges of like what certain identity brings, what it doesn't, and how people, you know, look at us and how they treat us sometimes, you know, depending on kind of the identities that we're talking about. But I think, you know, for people who want to, you know, be true to themselves and really to hold on to what, you know, they know is real, I think is so important, and for us to really define it for ourselves first and foremost. And I find that, you know, in different places, in different spaces and environment, our identity can kind of alter a little bit depending on, you know, who we're with and kind of our own kind of interaction too. And so these are things that I always think is super, like, you know, interesting to be aware of, to be, you know, conscious of. But that it doesn't kind of dictate kind of what, you know, ultimately we want to do, and we want to be able to make our kind of own decision and to have our own kind of agencies.
You're so right. Yeah, everything you just said like really resonated with me. I really appreciate that answer. Just kind of the whole idea of it's not a set thing you have to kind of define yourself as. Like you said, like artwork, your artwork is ever changing, so are you, and your identity can change in different environments. And it's just a nice thing to keep in mind. And as far as like art making goes with identity, I feel like something that I've noticed recently is when I'm not sure of my identity, I change the way my art looks, or I experiment a little more. I do, like, you know, mixed media, or try a different topic or way I approach something. And I notice the things that I always fall back to and the things that I like to improve upon. And I'm sure other artists do the same thing. You might do the same thing, but it's just nice to know that there are other people, you know, out there that can resonate with that. So.
Yeah, definitely. I'm really curious to also to hear about more about your journey with like art and like your own practice and everything.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, this has been like a really good conversation. I feel like it's the start of, you know, so many more things. Like, we're growing. You're an established artist, and you've been, you know, working in your practice for a while, and I have a lot to learn from you, and I also have a lot to learn about myself, and you still have a lot more you can learn too, because even though you have been, you know, an artist for a while and you have been working for the community, like, you can still change and grow, and there's still so many more things to learn as the world around us as we can see rapidly changing.
No, definitely. Yeah, it's so interesting when you say like even the word established, because I you know, consider myself as like, it's always like, you know, that word is like emerging and like, you know, like all those things. But yeah, there's something really, I think, about kind of the role of the artist and kind of what, you know, the role of art and all those stuff, and kind of what that means for ourselves, and how do we sustain ourselves in kind of the society values, and how, you know, they society value artists, and whether or not is really true to what, you know, they say it is.
Yes, yeah, that's totally true. And it's funny that you bring up the fact of like the established and emerging artists, because it's like, I know if younger me looked at myself now, I'd be like, oh my God, you're an artist now, and I still don't feel like an artist. And then I see people who are like showing things in galleries, and I'm like, that's what an artist is. But really, like, an artist is whatever you make it to be. An artist.
Yeah, I think the perception is like if you do a certain things and it makes you more legit, but that's not always the case, because people can, you know, have all these things, but are they, you know, being true to who they are and what they want to do? And to be honest, I mean, I definitely have period where I'm like, well, I gotta do this because it pays, or, you know, different
Of
kind of
course.
negotiation and everything like that. And it's not like, you know, but I think the journey of like being an artist versus what society expects of you, and what is like the placeholder of what determines like a quote unquote legitimacy.
I think that's something I'm still kind of struggling with, is getting out of that societal description of an artist, and moving past that into actually just making, and stopping to worry about, how am I being perceived? Because in the end, I can't control that. You just kind of got to make it and put stuff out there, and then, if things go your way, they do, and if they don't,
Yeah, and I think to keep going, I think that's what I realize it's like, and of course, different period in time in your life, but to really just continue to keep creating the work and to build
yeah,
a body of work, no matter what. And I think that's part of um, really, building your own craft, like
of course.
growing, and there are definitely moments when it's really tough, but I think to really just keep going. And I think that's also what distinguishes like short-term artists versus long-term artists too,
Yeah,
like successes versus whatnot. But I think to ultimately to keep on going, what is it that that will can help sustain you, and people around you that will support you in in your journey.
thank you. That's a great. This I just like am at a loss for words. This is very inspiring. I've kind of been in like a rut lately, being stuck in the house, and just everything in the world. I obviously am very privileged and lucky to be where I am, and have the resources that I do, but I just have to remember, yeah, I've got to just keep making it work, even if it's not good. Just got to keep going. Um, Thank you for taking the time for this conversation. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I so appreciate it too. Yeah, if you have anything else, feel free to be in touch and everything. But I so appreciate this this opportunity to share and to engage.